The room was not meant for a boy like him. It was too polished, too confident in its own importance, too accustomed to voices that already knew they belonged. Crystal lights rested above the audience like frozen stars, reflecting off polished glasses and tailored suits, and every chair in the room seemed to carry a quiet understanding of hierarchy. This was a place where reputations arrived before people did, where applause was controlled, measured, and rarely given to anyone who hadn't already earned it somewhere else. Yet the boy stood there anyway, small against the vastness of the stage, his shoes slightly scuffed, his jacket borrowed and a size too big, his hands clasped together as if holding himself steady against the weight of the room. No one had invited him to be extraordinary tonight. He was only there because he had asked, and because someone at the back door had shrugged and said, "Fine, one song. Make it quick." The music began softly, almost cautiously, like it wasn't sure whether it trusted him yet. And then the boy opened his mouth. His voice did not burst out. It didn't demand attention. It arrived, smooth in places, trembling in others, but honest all the way through. He was singing one of Dean Martin's old songs, not trying to imitate, not trying to perform, just trying to survive the moment. The words came out like something he had been carrying for a long time, as if he had practiced them not on stages, but in quiet rooms in late nights when no one was listening. A few heads turned. Not because they were impressed, not yet, but because something unexpected had happened. The room had been interrupted. At first, the interruption annoyed them. A man near the front leaned toward his companion and whispered something with a smile that wasn't kind. Another shifted in his seat, glancing toward the side of the stage, already deciding how long this would be allowed to continue. The boy didn't see any of it. He was looking at a point just above the audience, the way people do when they are afraid that if they look directly at faces, they might forget why they started. His voice wavered on one note, recovered on the next, and somehow that imperfection made it more human, not less. He wasn't polished. He wasn't trained for rooms like this, but he was real. That was the problem. Halfway through the song, the music cut. Not gently, not respectfully. It stopped the way a door slams when someone decides a conversation is over. The sudden silence felt heavier than the music ever had. A murmur rippled through the audience, and the boy froze, confusion spreading across his face before fear could even catch up. He turned slightly, looking toward the side of the stage, unsure whether he had done something wrong or whether this was simply how things worked in places like this. A man in a dark jacket stepped forward, his expression already rehearsed, polite on the surface, dismissive underneath. "That's enough," the man said, his voice carrying without effort. "This isn't an open audition. You've had your moment." The word moment landed like an insult. The boy swallowed. His fingers tightened at his sides. He nodded once, instinctively apologetic, even though he didn't know what he was apologizing for. He took a step back, then another, already shrinking, already learning the lesson the room was eager to teach him: know where you belong. A few people clapped, not in support but in relief, the way people clap when an inconvenience has ended. Someone laughed softly. Someone else checked their watch. The boy never cried, not yet, but something in his face changed, something quiet and irreversible, like a door closing somewhere deep inside him. He had known rejection before: auditions, callbacks that never came, doors that stayed shut, but this felt different. This felt public. This felt final. He had sung a song about warmth and love in a room that had neither, and now the room was reminding him of that fact. "Come on," the man said again, gesturing toward the exit. "Let's not make this awkward." That was when a voice, calm and unmistakable, cut through the space between stage and audience. "Let him finish." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The man stopped mid-gesture, irritation already forming until recognition replaced it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the audience turned. Some gasped quietly. Others straightened in their seats as if pulled by invisible strings. The room shifted, not in volume but in gravity. Dean Martin was standing. He hadn't announced himself. He hadn't drawn attention earlier. He had been sitting there the whole time, listening unseen by most, the way real authority often is. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't amused either. It was something far more unsettling to people who relied on control. It was disappointed. Not in the boy, in the interruption, in the room. I said, Dean repeated gently, let him finish the song. No one argued. The man on stage stepped back without a word, suddenly aware of how small his power was compared to the quiet weight of the man who had spoken. The music director hesitated, then nodded, hands moving quickly, almost nervously, to bring the track back in. The boy hadn't moved. He was still standing there, eyes wide, trying to understand what had just happened. He looked at Dean Martin, not with recognition, but with confusion, like someone who didn't yet know the shape of the lifeline that had just been thrown to him. Dean met his gaze and gave a small nod, not encouragement, permission. The music returned, softer than before, and this time when the boy sang, his voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. The room had changed. People were listening now, not because they had decided to be kind, but because something larger than them had reminded them what respect looked like. The boy sang the rest of the song as if he finally believed he had the right to be heard, and every word landed differently because of it. By the time the last note faded, no one clapped immediately. They were too still, too aware, and Dean Martin remained standing. The silence after the final note was heavier than applause. It pressed against the walls, against the glasses on the tables, against the very confidence of the room itself. People were no longer sure what kind of moment they were sitting inside. This had started as an interruption, something to be corrected and forgotten, but now it felt like a reckoning no one had prepared for. The boy stood frozen at the center of the stage, unsure whether he should bow, leave, or simply disappear before someone reminded him again that he didn't belong. His chest rose and fell too fast, adrenaline still ringing in his ears, and only now did he realize how badly his hands were shaking. He clasped them together, afraid that if he didn't, the truth of his fear would spill out for everyone to see. Dean Martin didn't move toward the stage right away. He understood rooms like this too well. He knew that power, when rushed, became performance, and performance was exactly what this moment did not need. Instead, he stayed where he was, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make people uncomfortable. It was a quiet lesson, the same kind Dean had learned decades earlier when he himself was the one being sized up, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside by men who believed the world only made room for those who already owned it. His eyes moved across the audience, not accusing, just observant, and several people found themselves unable to meet his gaze. Finally, someone began to clap. It was hesitant at first, almost apologetic, as if the person feared they were misunderstanding the situation. Then another joined and another until applause filled the room, not explosive, not celebratory, but real. The boy flinched at the sound. He hadn't expected it. His instinct was still trained on rejection, not acceptance, and applause felt dangerous in a way silence never had. He nodded once quickly and took a step backward, ready to leave before the room changed its mind. Wait, Dean said. The single word stopped him more effectively than any raised voice ever could. The boy turned slowly. Dean was walking now, not toward the spotlight but toward the edge of the stage, careful not to make the moment about himself. He didn't climb the steps. He looked up instead, leveling the space between them with posture alone. From this distance the boy could finally see him clearly, the lines in his face, the calm confidence, the unmistakable presence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Recognition flickered across the boy's expression, followed immediately by panic. He had sung his song. He had been kicked off stage singing his song, and now he was standing there. I didn't interrupt you, Dean said evenly. You were interrupted. The boy didn't know what to say. His mouth opened, closed, then settled on a quiet, I'm sorry, sir. Dean smiled, not amused, not indulgent, but understanding. Don't be, he replied. Apologizing for having a voice is a bad habit, best not to start young. A few people laughed softly, unsure whether they were allowed to. The man who had ordered the music cut stood rigid off to the side, suddenly aware that every choice he had made was now part of a story he did not control. Dean turned slightly, acknowledging him without hostility. "He asked for one song," Dean said. "He gave you one song. That should count for something." The man nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yes, of course, Mr. Martin. This venue has standards." Dean's eyes returned to the boy. "So does talent," he said quietly. That was when the mood in the room shifted from discomfort to tension, because now it wasn't just about kindness. It was about authority, about who had the right to decide whose voice mattered. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing that this moment was no longer small. It was becoming a mirror, and mirrors made people nervous. Dean gestured gently toward the microphone. "Tell them your name." The boy hesitated. Saying his name out loud felt more dangerous than singing ever had. Names could be remembered. Names could be judged. But something in Dean's tone told him this wasn't a request that would leave him unprotected. He stepped forward, swallowing hard. "My name is Daniel," he said. I just like to sing." Dean nodded, as if that was the most reasonable explanation in the world. "How long you been liking it?" he asked. "Since my mom used to play records," Daniel replied, "when things were quiet." That single sentence carried more weight than the boy realized. Dean heard it immediately, the pauses, the absence, the unspoken history inside the word quiet. He didn't pry. He didn't need to. Some truths announced themselves without detail. Dean turned back to the audience. "You heard him," he said. "He's not here to take anything from you. He's here because music found him before the world did." No one interrupted. No one dared. But not everyone was pleased. From the back of the room, a voice rose, measured, confident, and sharp enough to cut through sentiment. "With respect, Mr. Martin, this isn't a charity showcase. If we let everyone with a sad story take the stage." Dean didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He simply looked toward the sound and said, "If you think music is charity, you've never needed it." The room went still again. Daniel felt something change inside him in that moment. Not confidence, not pride, something steadier, something quieter. For the first time, he realized that this wasn't just about him being allowed to sing. It was about someone standing between him and a system that had already decided his worth without ever asking who he was. And that realization was heavier than fear. Dean reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief, offering it without explanation. Daniel took it instinctively, confused, until he felt the dampness on his face and realized tears had started falling without his permission. He wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. Dean leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Daniel could hear. "People will try to move you out of the way long before they understand you," he said. "That doesn't mean you're in the wrong place." The words stayed with Daniel instantly, embedding themselves deeper than applause ever could. Dean straightened and addressed the room one final time. "We're done here for tonight," he said calmly. "Not because the music stopped, but because the lesson shouldn't be repeated." And with that, he placed a hand lightly on Daniel's shoulder and guided him off the stage, not like someone being escorted out, but like someone being introduced to a different path. No cameras flashed, no announcements were made. But everyone in that room understood something irreversible had just happened. And Daniel, walking beside Dean Martin, felt the world tilt, not toward fame, not toward success, but toward possibility. The hallway beyond the stage was quieter than Daniel expected, but not kinder. The applause had stayed behind in the room like a closed door, and with every step away from it, the weight of what had just happened began to settle in. He could hear his own breathing again, uneven and loud in his ears, as if the moment on stage had borrowed time from his body and was now demanding it back. Dean Martin walked beside him without speaking, his pace unhurried, his presence steady in a way that made the corridor feel less narrow than it really was. Daniel wanted to say something, thank you, maybe, or sorry again, but the words felt small compared to what had already been done for him without being asked. They reached a quiet side room, the kind meant for performers to escape noise, not consequences. Dean closed the door gently, not to isolate Daniel but to give him space to breathe. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Dean leaned against the table, arms crossed loosely, observing the boy the way one listens to a song after it ends, attentive, patient, allowing the meaning to rise on its own. "You didn't expect that," Dean said at last, not as a question. Daniel shook his head. "I didn't expect anything," he admitted. "I just wanted to sing before someone told me no." Dean nodded slowly. "That's usually how it starts." Daniel looked up, surprised. He had imagined Dean Martin's life as something uninterrupted, a smooth road paved with applause, open doors, and invitations. The idea that rejection might have been part of it didn't fit the legend he had built in his head. Dean noticed the look and smiled faintly. "People forget," he said, "that legends are just people who didn't leave when the room tried to make them uncomfortable." Before Daniel could respond, a knock hit the door, sharp, impatient, and deliberate. Dean didn't move immediately. He waited as if deciding whether the knock deserved to exist. When it came again, louder this time, he pushed himself upright and opened the door just enough to see who stood on the other side. Two men waited there, one from venue management, the other someone Daniel didn't recognize, dressed too expensively for coincidence. Their expressions were polite but tight, like smiles worn under obligation. "Mr. Martin," the manager began, "we need to speak with you." Dean glanced back at Daniel. "You stay," he said quietly, not a suggestion, a shield. The men hesitated, then stepped inside. The room felt smaller instantly. Daniel stayed where he was, hands folded in front of him, suddenly aware that the protection he had been given might be temporary or, worse, conditional. "We respect your status," the second man said carefully, "but tonight crossed a line." Dean raised an eyebrow. "Interesting," he replied. "I was thinking the same thing." The manager cleared his throat. "This venue operates on reputation. Allowing unscheduled performers, especially minors, creates liability, and publicly overruling staff exposes character," Dean finished. His voice was calm, but the air shifted. "Yours, not mine." The man stiffened. "With all due respect, this isn't about a boy's feelings, it's about order." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He understood that word. Order was what people used when they didn't want to say power. Dean looked toward Daniel then, not to embarrass him, but to include him, to make it clear he was not the subject of the conversation, but the reason for it. "Order," Dean said. "Without fairness is just fear wearing a uniform." Silence followed, the kind that threatens instead of comforts. The second man leaned forward. "You're asking us to make exceptions," he said, "and exceptions set precedents." Dean smiled faintly. "So does cruelty." The manager sighed, frustration slipping through his professionalism. "We're asking you to distance yourself from this situation, for your own sake. The press doesn't need to turn this into a story about favoritism or theatrics." Daniel's heart sank. He finally understood the cost. Dean wasn't just being kind, he was risking something. Reputation, relationships, access. The invisible currency that kept doors open even when talent wasn't enough. Daniel took a step forward instinctively. "It's okay," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, I can go." Dean turned sharply, not angry but firm. "No," he said. "You don't volunteer yourself to be erased to make others comfortable." The words landed harder than anything else that night. Dean faced the men again. "This boy didn't ask me to stand up for him," he said. "I chose to. If that creates a problem, then the problem isn't the choice, it's the room." The second man exhaled slowly, defeated. "Then we'll have to reconsider future invitations." Dean shrugged lightly. Do what you need to do. The message was clear. Leverage only works if both sides are afraid to lose something. The men left without another word. When the door closed, the silence that followed was different, heavier, but honest. Daniel stared at the floor, guilt flooding him now that the adrenaline had faded. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know it would." Dean placed a hand on his shoulder again, grounding him. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "The world will always find a way to make you feel responsible for its discomfort. That's how it protects itself from change." Daniel swallowed. What if they're right? What if I don't belong? Dean's expression softened, but his voice did not. "Belonging isn't granted," he said. "It's claimed. And tonight you claimed it by not leaving when you were told to disappear." Daniel looked up, eyes burning, something fierce and fragile awakening inside him. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about singing for approval. He was thinking about singing because it was his. Dean reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, writing something on it slowly, deliberately. He handed it to Daniel. "Tomorrow," he said, "be there, not because I said so, because you owe it to the voice you almost lost tonight." Daniel stared at the card, hands shaking again, but this time from something closer to hope. Outside the room, the venue returned to normal. Laughter resumed, music played, life went on. But for Daniel, and for the people who had tried to silence him, nothing was the same anymore. Because once someone stands between you and erasure, you can never pretend you didn't matter. The next evening arrived without ceremony. No spotlight waited at the door. No one whispered Daniel's name as he stepped inside. The address on the card had led him not to a grand theater, but to a modest rehearsal hall tucked behind the city's louder promises. The kind of place where work happened quietly and excuses weren't entertained. Daniel stood outside for a long moment before entering, the card warm in his pocket as if it still carried Dean's hand. For the first time since the night everything changed, Dean was not beside him, and the absence felt intentional. Inside, the room was already alive with sound, not applause, practice. Piano keys warming up, voices stretching, shoes tapping rhythm into old wooden floors. People moved with purpose, not reverence. No one cared who Daniel was supposed to be. That scared him more than rejection ever had. Because here, no one would stop the music if he failed. A woman at the front checked a clipboard and called names without looking up. When she reached his, she paused only long enough to confirm he was real. "Daniel," she said, "you're last." Last meant everything and nothing at the same time. He took a seat against the wall, listening as singers before him stepped forward. Some were flawless, voices trained and confident. Others stumbled, corrected, tried again. No one was cruel, but no one was gentle either. This wasn't a room built on kindness. It was built on truth. And Daniel realized something terrifying as he waited. Whatever happened here would belong to him alone. He scanned the room instinctively, half expecting to see Dean leaning against a wall, arms crossed, ready to intervene if the world turned sharp again. But Dean wasn't there, not visibly, and Daniel finally understood why. Protection, he realized, was never meant to be permanent. When his name was called again, it echoed differently now. Final, unaccompanied, he stood, legs heavy but steady, and walked to the center of the room. The pianist glanced at him, neutral, waiting. No music started automatically. No one assumed he deserved it. "What are you singing?" the woman asked. Daniel hesitated. He could choose something safe, something impressive, something that proved he belonged. Instead, he said the truth. The same song. A murmur moved through the room, not disapproval, not excitement, curiosity. The pianist nodded and began. This time Daniel didn't look above the room. He looked straight ahead, at faces, at doubt, at indifference, at the quiet threat of being ordinary, and he sang, not louder than before, not stronger, but owned. Every note carried the memory of being told to leave. Every lyric carried the weight of someone standing between him and erasure. then stepping away so he could learn to stand alone. His voice cracked once. He didn't stop. He missed a breath. He adjusted. And something remarkable happened. The room leaned in, not because of fame, not because of interruption, but because courage had entered the sound. Not borrowed courage, earned courage, the kind that doesn't ask permission to exist. When the last note faded, no one spoke immediately, not because they were stunned, but because nothing needed explaining. The woman with the clipboard closed it slowly. "Thank you," she said. "That will be all." Daniel nodded, heart pounding, and stepped back, already bracing for disappointment. He didn't look for approval. He had learned that lesson. He simply returned to his seat and waited for the room to forget him. It didn't. At the end of the session, the woman approached him quietly. "You'll hear from us," she said. "No promise, no dismissal, just possibility." Daniel walked out into the evening air alone. The city felt larger than before, but not colder. He took the card from his pocket again, turning it over, realizing now that it hadn't been an invitation. It had been a challenge. Across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost as if he had always been there, Dean Martin watched him emerge. Daniel froze. Dean smiled, not stepping forward right away. He waited until Daniel crossed the street himself. "You stayed," Dean said. Daniel nodded. "You didn't." Dean's smile widened, proud this time. "Exactly." They stood there in the quiet, the city humming around them, no stage between them now. Daniel looked older somehow, not taller, not stronger, but steadier. "I was scared," Daniel admitted, "more than before." Dean nodded. "That's how you know it mattered." Daniel hesitated, then asked the question that had been waiting since the first interruption. "Why did you do it, that night?" Dean looked out at the street for a long moment before answering. "Because someone once did it for me," he said, and then stepped away. Daniel understood. They didn't walk together after that. Dean tipped his hat, turned, and disappeared into the evening without ceremony, without applause, without witnesses. And Daniel stood there alone, not abandoned, not protected, but ready. Because the greatest gift Dean Martin had given him was not a stage. It was the courage to stand on one, without anyone stopping the music.